3, 2, 1, go. Careful. What are you doing? Are you okay?
Hello and welcome to Power Drifting, the Rally Game podcast. My name is Tom and this is Bonus Stage. I think if you've been listening to any of our previous episodes, you'll know the drill by now. Bonus Stage is where either myself or my colleague Mike take it on ourselves to wax lyrical about a particular rally game that maybe the other one hasn't played, or even a series, as is the case in this episode. Today I'm going back in time to when the PS Vita was still a thing with a pulse. And that's because recently we did an episode on the fantastic WRC 9 game on the current gen systems. And it just made me think that, you know, we've had some really good WRC games in the recent past. And one system we haven't actually looked at yet on this podcast is the PS Vita. The PS Vita actually played host to 3 different WRC games, and they spread across several years and 2 different developers. So what I'm going to do in this episode is take a look at each of them in turn, and they are namely WRC 3, WRC 4 and WRC 5. Just give each section of this episode time to have a look at each of these 3 different releases on the PS Vita, talk about the pros and cons, and then at the end I'm going to come back around and maybe do a little summary and explain which I think is the best and maybe which is not so good. This is going to be a bit of a WRC jamboree on the old PS Vita, so if you've still got your Vita hanging around, or you're up for some rally action, stay tuned and you'll find out which I think is the particular road to travel. Okay, let's go.
On gravel, left 3 and right 6. Drop outside. Then left 3 and right 2.
Okay then, we will kick things off on the Vita with WRC 3. Now this was released in 2012 and is based on the 2012 WRC Championship. And for a first attempt from Milestone, it's actually a pretty decent attempt. It looks pretty much identical to it looks very similar to the PS3 and Xbox 360 game of the same name. And on first booting the game up, you are treated to what is a soundtrack that may split opinion. It's very dubsteppy, shall we say. It leans towards the dubstep side of things. That said, it sounds pretty good in places. Other places it's a bit of an assault on the ears. One of the main things that you'll notice though in WRC 3 on the PS Vita is that it doesn't actually have the career mode or the Road to Glory, I think it's called, on the consoles. So basically, all you've got to do is single rallies. You can do a single stage, a full rally, or the championship. Now that probably doesn't sound too bad, but when you factor in the fact that there are only 6 locations in this game, as opposed to I think 12 or 13 in the console version, you've only got 6 locations, and within each location you've got 6 stages. So there's not a lot of content really, to be honest. As I say, you can tackle those as a time trial, single one-off stage, or you can do an entire rally, 6 stages in sequence, or you can do the full championship, which is all 6 locations with 6 stages in each. And you've got 3 different classes of vehicle. You've got the WRC, you've got WRC2, and then you've got I think it's N2000 it's called, or rather Class 2 and they're called Class 2 and Class 3 in WRC, but you've got about between 3 and 4 cars in each class, all the real world WRC drivers from that era. And yeah, I mean, out on the course, it looks pretty nice, to be honest. I always think of Vita games as being a sort of a cross between, or somewhere in between, a PS2 and a PS3 game, and this is no different. It all moves very well. The courses are all very well detailed. The cars are nicely detailed. There's damage. There's a whole host of camera angles. So you've got your standard bonnet cams, your external views. There's a really nice cockpit view as well. It all moves along at a really nice pace as well. The default settings on the controls do take a little bit of getting used to because they did back then. You've got the triggers on the shoulder buttons on the Vita. And, that's not too bad, but the shoulder buttons on the Vita they're not analog, obviously, and they're a bit kind of loose, a bit loose and clicky. It does take a while to get used to them, but the way that the game kind of handles the digital inputs is actually quite commendable. It doesn't really feel like you're at a disadvantage because you haven't got analog controls. So that's worth bearing in mind. You can obviously change the controls around if you like. And one interesting feature this game does have that a lot of the modern WRC games have omitted is the ability to rewind at the press of a button. So if you do come a cropper on a corner, you can just hit that triangle button and rewind for a good. I'm not sure exactly how long it goes back, but it goes back a long way. So the game must be recording it somewhere in the in the internal memory to allow you to just kind of return and just basically hit start and continue from where you were doing okay. So that's a nice feature. There's not really a great deal more to say about this game. I mean, I'm playing this in the present day, which is at the time of recording, October 2020. And if you've listened to our recent WRC 9 episode, we did mention things like lack of rewind function. And for it to have been in a game back in 2012, but kind of not being a more modern WRC game, is that a choice that they made just to make the game a bit more difficult, a bit more challenging? Or was it something else? I don't know. But the fact that it's in a Vita game, it's a nice touch. And yeah, the only real kind of downside to WRC 3 on the Vita is that complete stripping out of the career mode, because it doesn't feel like there's nothing to unlock. There's no progression really through the game. You've got everything unlocked from the start. All the vehicles are there available from the start. I can see potentially why that would have been the case. Back when the Vita was in its infancy, maybe things like quick pick up and play, sort of arcade, inverted commas, blasts of games were what people were wanting from their handheld experiences. But technically, it's very accomplished and looks really nice on the Vita screen. But yeah, it's just that complete lack of any real single player longevity after you've had a quick blast around some of the courses and tried out some of the different cars. It's a bit lacking. One thing I will say about this game though as well, it's quite odd that it's now no longer available as a download from the PS Vita store. If you search for WRC on the Vita store, certainly in Europe, you won't find this game. It's been deleted from the store, so you can find WRC 4, WRC 5, but WRC 3 has been erased from the record, shall we say. And so the only way to play it, if you haven't already got it stored in your downloads list, is to find it on physical media, and that can be quite expensive, just because a lot of Vita games now are becoming quite collectible, and this is no different. It's one of those games that is becoming quite, I think, sought after, simply because it's it's the earliest WRC game on the Vita. Not the first WRC game on a PlayStation handheld. That would go back to the Traveller's Tales WRC game on the PSP, PlayStation Portable. Needed to think then, all these PS named consoles. But yeah, WRC 3, it's worth a go if you find it cheap. But yeah, that lack of single player longevity just kind of makes it not as good as it could have been. Let's move on to WRC 4 and let's see how that fares. Moving on then to WRC 4 on the PS Vita. This one was released in 2013, and following on from WRC 3, it takes the 2013 WRC Championship and packages it all up into a nice little cartridge for your Vita. The first thing you'll note in WRC 4 over WRC 3 is that it looks like the budget for the presentation has been like quadrupled or something, because as soon as you turn the game on, as soon as it starts, you've got this fantastic FMV kind of background with all, in all the menus, you've got this slow motion WRC cars careening around tracks and throwing up mud and snow and whatnot. And it just looks really professional. It's a stunning a bit of presentation. Not just that, the kind of music is this kind of rousing, like orchestral, gives it like a real authentic rally feel to it. And it's like night and day between WRC 3 and WRC 4. It's like they kind of went back to the drawing board, saw what they could potentially do with WRC 3 on the Vita, and then go, do you know what, let's move the notch up a bit, and we'll see what we can do with a Vita, with putting some more time and effort into this game and really pushing the system. And what you get with WRC4 is something which is approaching perfection when it comes to a handheld rally game, and I'll go into that more over the course of this section of the podcast. First things first, though, is the features in the game. You do have a hell of a lot more content here than you do in WRC3. You've got your standard modes, you've got quick rally, you've got your rally mode, and you've got multiplayer. But crucially in WRC4, what you have is a full-blown career mode where you start off in the lower sort of divisions of the rally world. You have a full calendar. and you have to compete in subsequent rallies, impress your sponsors, and basically move through the ranks, get new contracts with new manufacturers. You have rivals that you have little kind of spits and spats with throughout the loading screens during the course of a rally. Loads of little nice touches like that, which are completely missing from WRC 3 on the Vita. So yeah, this is a complete package really. It's almost like they've shoehorned the complete WRC 4 console version onto a handheld. And Milestone, really, I do commend them for that, because even though WRC 3 was a extremely playable game and looked the part on the Vita, WRC 4 is it's a masterclass in how you do a sequel. I can't think of another game on the Vita, like, racing game at least, that's got this amount of detail, content, and just polish. Really, everything about it, from the menu screens, the music, to the audio, the gameplay, the visuals, everything about it is just a notch above what came before. Out on the course, you do have pretty much the same game engine as you do in WRC 3. It looks a little bit cleaner in places. It looks like they've added a little bit more detail to the environments and just kind of refined everything rather than build everything again from the ground up. They've taken the WRC 3 experience and just kind of cleaned everything up. I'm not very technically minded, so I'm not entirely sure what they've done to it, but it just looks nicer, moves a little bit nicer, and yeah, you've got a little bit more visual detail in there as well. There are a couple of little things I'm not too keen on. For example, the audio mix. The default audio mix has everything kind of set to high, and that makes it quite difficult to hear the co-driver when you're playing in first-person view, like bonnet cam and inside the cockpit. So you need to tinker with the sound audio sliders ever so slightly just to make him more audible. Otherwise, it's pretty much as you were on WRC 3, so you've got pretty much the same controls. You've still got that fantastic rewind mode. You've still got the triggers for accelerate and brake, and then X or circle depending on your setup for handbrake. But yeah, it's really, really good single-player rally game, in handheld form. You've got so much more content than you had in WRC 3, and that even extends to the fact that you've got more environments to race in, more courses. You can change the time of day. You can't change the weather, but you can change the time of day that you race in, which obviously has an effect on the lighting effect on the course. It's just more bigger and better, really. It's what WRC 3 on the Vita should have been, but wasn't. So there's little things that that can't really be accessed now. So you've got things like an online rally, and you've got leaderboards, etc. But it's 2020. The amount of people who are playing WRC 4 around the world, I'm guessing, is probably in single digits at this stage. So when you do open that multiplayer menu, there's nobody ever in there. So that's a bit of a shame. But otherwise, you've got quite a lot of stuff in WRC 4, and it's still available on the PS Vita store, quite cheap as well, and it's readily available as a physical purchase as well. So for me, this is probably the best of the bunch. It takes everything that WRC 3 was and basically chucks a load more content in there, and what you're left with is basically the best rally game on the Vita. Arguably one of the best handheld rally games that is still available, in my opinion, and that includes current gen. So if you do own a Vita and you like rally games, WRC 4 is the way to go. And not WRC 5, as we'll find out in the next section.
Hard brake, hairpin left. Onto lap right, into left 5, 4, crest, into left 5, into right 4, short, onto right to minus.
Okay, moving on to the third and final WRC game on the PS Vita. That would be WRC 5. This one was released in 2015 after a year break from WRC 4. And what happened in that year was that the license changed hands between Milestone and was taken on by a new developer called Kiloton, who was still the owner of the WRC license. They did the recent WRC 9. WRC 5 was their first attempt, and the console versions got mixed reception, but the Vita version is, let's just say, takes some liberties. I don't really know what else to say about it. It's an odd one, because it's commendable that they were still releasing games for the Vita in 2015 and that they even bothered to put this game on the Vita. Maybe it was a contractual thing, I don't know. But the people over at Milestone must have been waiting for this to come out just to see what a different studio could do with the license on the handheld platform. And I'd like to have seen their faces when they actually first booted this game up. And it's not because of the presentation. It's because of all the other stuff, which I'll go into in a second. First things first, presentation-wise, it's every bit as slick as the previous game and the console versions. It's got really nice menus, great orchestral, atmospheric music. It's got everything down to a T, really. You've got a full career mode in there. You've got all of the tracks and drivers and vehicles from the 2015 WRC. So on first look, on face value, you've got pretty much another complete WRC experience on a handheld platform. Things start to go slightly awry, shall we say, when you get into the game proper. And that's because Kiloton used their own bespoke engine for the Vita version. And while it's arguably, the same case that Milestone did that with the Vita with their game, the difference is that the engine, to me at least, that was in the previous games was scaled to the Vita, and the Vita could kind of handle it. With WRC 5, it's almost like they tried to be too ambitious, and in the end, it just looks a bit off. And I'll try to explain this in the best way I can with my limited technical knowledge. Basically, it seems to me like the game is running like a massive open world, but an open world where everything is already rendered into the distance. So there's a massive amount of view distance, but there's no kind of fading in the distance. So, if you stand on a hilltop on a clear day and you look into the distance, I'm talking about real life, by the way, and like the stuff that's further away kind of seems a bit sort of hazy. So you've got, particles of moisture in the atmosphere or whatever it might be, makes things that are like 10 miles away don't look really sort of clear as if something's right in front of your face. However, in WRC 5, that's what it looks like. There's no kind of, is it volumetric fog, if you want to call it? I don't know if that's the correct term, but everything in the environment, whether it's 2 feet in front of your car or 2 miles away in the distance, is equally clear. And I mean, that's not the end of the world. It eliminates pop-up of like things like trees. What it doesn't do is it doesn't eliminate the pop-up of trackside objects such as barriers or crowds. So it's almost like, imagine a PC game with all the settings turned down to like literally the most minimal they can go. And that's what WRC 5 on the Vita looks like. It's really hard to explain. I'm sure if you go onto YouTube or you go onto Google and just have a look for some screenshots, you'll see exactly what I mean straight away. And the worst part of this is the fact that even though everything is set so low, textures are so low, almost no textures on the ground or on the environment, it still manages to move at about 25 frames a second, sometimes lower, especially when you're using the external camera views and you've got maybe, you're going through an area with a lot of foliage or buildings. Sometimes it dips to like 10, 15 frames a second. And on top of that, you've got screen tearing as well. It does look pretty bad, to be honest, even for a Vita game. That said, the car models look really, really good. They're easily on a par with what was in WRC 4 and 3. So there is that. Elsewhere, the sound as well is actually pretty good. The car is almost backfires too much, but it still sounds pretty good. And there's none of the same issues with the sound mix in WRC 5. So the co-driver is really, you can really hear him. He's really coherent, and the sound is really well done, to be honest. It's just those visuals. It looks bad. It looks very bad even for a Vita game. It looks bad. I remember there was a bit of controversy as well because on the back of the box for WRC 5, it does state that there is a night racing mode, but that does not appear in the game. So you can race at dusk, in the morning or at noon, but it doesn't make any difference on the lighting effects in the game. It's hard to put into words how disappointing WRC 5 is from a visual standpoint, because everything else is pretty much spot on. Like I say, it's got a really good career mode. It's got all of the tracks and vehicles and all the content that you'd expect from a console port. It's just the actual game itself plays so poorly. It's a missed opportunity, really. I think if they'd stuck with obviously it's a different developer, so they couldn't have taken what Milestone had done, but maybe they'd looked at Milestone and just kind of emulated what they'd done there. I think it was just a case of, right, we've got the license now, we want to do it our way, we're going to do it different, we're going to do it better. It's going to be so far removed from what came before on the Vita that there's going to be no way that you can even compare the two, and that's true, but not in a good way. So yeah, if WRC 5 is the final game in the series on the Vita, but it's by no means the best. And it's just the way the game looks and plays is just, it's really, really poor, to be honest. So yeah, buyer beware, basically. Again, as with WRC 4, WRC 5 is available on the PS Store still. However, I think it's about £50 as opposed to about 12 or 13 for WRC 4. So if you are weighing up a game to get, don't think that just because this is the later game in the series that it's the better game, because it really isn't. I will sort of round them all up in a minute, but I just wanted to talk about a few more positives on WRC 5. As I say, the menus and everything are basically the same as they are in the console version, and you do get all of the same gameplay modes and the full complement of vehicles and environments. And a nice extra that you don't get in the other games is that you do get a rally school as well. So if you are having trouble controlling the vehicle or learning how to, get around those corners, you can spend some time in the training mode and perfect your craft, really. So that's a nice little addition that the other games don't have. But elsewhere, as I say, out on the actual course, this is a huge disappointment. So just bear that one in mind. So let's finish this up now and talk about all three games and give a little summary. Okay then, as I've said many times in this episode, there are three games here that we've looked at: WRC 3, WRC 4, WRC 5. They all offer something different, be that in terms of content, the way the games look and play, and whether or not they have any kind of real longevity in terms of single player options. It's worth saying that all of these games at the time they were released did have multiplayer options and online components, but as you would imagine, in 2020 those are no longer available. Well, they are available. You can actually you can choose them from the menus, but there's not a lot going on in any of them, so it's best just to write those off, to be honest. But when it comes to choosing which game you should buy and which game you should avoid, I'm going to rank them now. I'm going to go in reverse order. I'm going to go from worst to best. So in third place, undoubtedly, just down to the way it looks and plays and feels, nothing wrong with the content. It's got to be WRC 5. It's just plain bad on the Vita. Console versions, perfectly playable, fairly average rally game. PS Vita version, give it a wide berth. It's not worth your money. It's a very poor game. Coming up in second place, I'm going to have to go with WRC 3, just because it plays really well, it looks really nice, but it's just not got a lot of content in there. What I didn't mention earlier on in the first section of this podcast is that there were some DLC tracks released for WRC 3. So there were 3 new environments released as DLC. Because this game has now been deleted from the store, that DLC has also gone off into the ether, so I've never seen it. I don't know where you could get it from. But if you did play it back in the day and did download the extra content, then you've got a bigger game, but still no career mode. And then that just leaves in top position, in first position, in pole position even, that would be WRC 4. I can't really praise this game enough as a handheld rally experience. It's got everything you could want. It's got great visuals. It plays really well. It's got a fantastic career mode. And the presentation is just absolutely top draw. Seriously, buy this game, and just when you start the game, you see that FMV backgrounds on the menu. Obviously, don't just buy it for the menus, but it's a nice touch because if you've never seen it before and you're not expecting it, it's just like, oh wow, this has got really nice kind of console level presentation. Great music. Just remember to do the audio mix for the co-driver and the engine sound effects, because otherwise you won't be able to hear what he's saying. You have to just rely on the arrows popping up on the screen, which is not ideal in a rally game. So yeah, there you have it. Third place, WRC 5. Second place, WRC 3. Pole position, top of the podium, WRC 4. Give it a go. Fantastic game. Okay, that's me. I've been Tom. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Bonus Stage. You can find all of our other episodes at www.powerdriftingpodcast.com. Find us on Twitter at powerdriftingpod. And give us a follow, give us a like, or whatever you do these days on those things. Leave us an iTunes review if you can be bothered. And thanks very much for listening. And I will see you on the next episode of Power Drifting, the Rally Game Podcast. See you later.